If the only constant is change, then how have you changed yourself or your mind in a big way? Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson along with our DJ Tolliver. And Tolliver, this hour's topic is not as newsy as some that we take on here at The Middle, but it's kind of connected to everything that we end up talking about.
You know, Jeremy, today it's like the callers are the news, okay? It's
Absolutely.
still an easy day. It's just
The callers are the news. Well, let's hope that they're good callers and good news today. The change is what we're talking about this hour. People who change their habits or are born again into religion, or who leave their religion, who reinvent themselves, who change their gender identity. And of course, in the theme of our show, we want to hear from people who have changed their views on important issues or their politics. So call us and tell us how you have changed at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. And we're going to get to your calls in just a moment. But first, last week, we asked how the war in Iran is affecting you. Here are some of the voicemails that came in.
Dedicated middle listener here, Daniel, calling from Utah. I think it's just one ineptitude after another. First, we had illegal tariffs that have driven up prices. Now we have illegal war that's put undue burden on so many in America. When will people say enough is enough?
I'm calling from Colorado. My best friend's son is deployed in the Middle East somewhere in this godforsaken war. I am very disturbed by the loss of human life. Our reputation around the world has been disgraced.
My name is Paul, calling from Tulsa, PA. And with this Iranian thing, what a waste of money. What a waste of lives. Oh, we don't have money for health care. War, no problem. Killing people around the world, no big deal.
A lot of negativity there, Tolliver, but kind of representative, because a new poll finds 61% of people in America, voters, disapprove of the U.S. war in Iran. You can hear that full show and more of your voicemails on our podcast extra, the follow-up. Just subscribe to The Middle on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. So now to our topic this hour. How have you changed yourself or changed your mind about something that really matters? Tolliver, the number, please.
You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on YouTube.
Joining me this hour, Benoit Denizet-Lewis, author of the new book, You've Changed: The Promise and Price of Self-Transformation. Benoit, welcome.
Jeremy, thanks for having me.
And John Wood Jr. is also with us, National Ambassador for Braver Angels, which aims to bridge this country's political divide. John, welcome to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on with you.
Well, Benoit, let me start with you. You've written this great book looking at all the ways that we try to change. We're talking about everything from changing your sexual identity to your physical appearance to your personality. What did you find? Is there a theme that runs through it about change?
Yeah, well, I was interested in change from sort of two perspectives. One is the interior experience that the person feels when they feel like a new or different or changed person. What is that experience like? And it can be really exciting and empowering, and it feels very true, or it can be very disorienting and confusing and scary. And so I was interested in sort of looking at that in the ways that, both for ways that we want to change and then ways that change sort of happens to us, and we have to sort of reckon with it. And then secondly, I was really interested in sort of the politics of change, right? We talk about inner change as this self-transformation, this thing that we engineer from some sort of deep sense of ourselves, when in reality, self-transformation is a kind of team sport. We change in relationship to other people. Our changes are celebrated or discounted or ridiculed, or depending on sort of which way we're changing. So I was really interested sort of also in how the rest of us interpret the changes of others, whether that's politics, gender, faith. We have really some very sort of knee-jerk, incoherent ways that we interpret that.
Well, and how often do the big changes occur because of something that we do purposefully versus outside forces that we don't have control over?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, you know, there were ways that I personally wanted to change. I wanted to become like a better friend. I wanted to be better in my relationships. So that was a kind of choice that I wanted to sort of seek out, right? We have these ways that we want to change ourselves. And then there are these moments which I'm really, really interested in, whether it's moments that come from psychedelics, or moments that come from tragedy, or moments that are sort of mysterious. We're walking through the forest and we have an epiphany. We change our mind about something. We think of, we have very different priorities. Those were the kinds of changes that I was particularly interested in. These things that these moments or these relationships that end up changing sort of the way that we go through the world and what's important to us. So I talked to a lot of people who experience that, and it can be really, really fun and really and scary, because other people then have to judge our new perspective, and that can cause a lot of problems. Whether it's we're changing our politics, we're changing our faith, our gender, all of that is sort of like other people are judging that.
Right. And John Wood Jr., that's a perfect opportunity for us to talk to you, because you have seen up close how people change their political views or their deeply held beliefs, or don't. What do you think causes someone to change their beliefs?
Well, I think it varies. I think that, in my case, and I'm kind of a deluxe example of somebody who changed his mind on pretty big things, because I went through a sort of a religious conversion, or rather I sort of wound up, kind of coming to a belief in God, and eventually sort of an embrace of religion, while also going through a political conversion. And these two things were related, but they were distinct in my case. And so there's a big story to go along with each of them. But what I'll note, though, is that in my case, the big transformations, they were a consequence of experiences that I had, to be sure, but they also were very much a consequence of an intentional kind of mode of reflection, leading me through to new conclusions about things.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that I was somebody who was sort of, curious and studiously attentive to the question of, what is true in the absolute sense, and also, what is right, what is wrong, what's true in the ethical sense, and also what's true for human flourishing as it relates to public policy and so forth, right? And so, in the context of, being a young person, working sort of for hope and change and so forth, and faceting myself in a particular way, I wound up going through a series of sort of insights and reflections, accompanied by experiences, but they landed me in a more conservative place. But what I tell people is that one thing that makes me a little bit different from some other folks who kind of went from left to right is that, as I tell folks, I didn't have an ugly divorce with liberalism. We're still on good terms, And I think that what happens...
Let me just ask you, why does it seem right now like so many people, though, in this country are so averse to change, that they are stuck in their political beliefs, that nothing that happens would get them to change their political views?
Well, it's interesting, because I think it relates to the same reality that in some cases does get people to change their views. And so, the other way in which I think people change their minds sometimes is through trauma, frankly. I mean, particularly as it pertains to politics and religion and so forth. So, you've got some people who grow up in a rigid, stifling, conservative environment, and it's traumatizing in a way that opens them up to a whole new kind of more progressive way of looking at things. And then you have people, and this was very sort of, frequently stated, and sort of, the awakening of 2020 and so on and so forth. But you had people who thought of themselves as liberal, but they weren't liberal enough for their college friends and coworkers, and they had bad social experiences, which pushed them to the right. But in general, we stay in our partisan tribes because we are, I think, in some sense, traumatizing each other. We're tribalized against each other. And so my belief becomes the basis for my identity, which becomes the basis for my tribal allegiance and therefore my political allegiance. And so it's a big risk to your self-definition to change your mind because of those surrounding social factors. And that explains so much of our politics.
Yeah.
Jeremy, if I can just jump in really quick on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, very few people seek to have their minds changed. I mean, it's so fascinating, right? On the one hand, like, we see that as a positive, that our mind is changed. Oh, you're malleable, you can change your mind. And then we're also very defensive. Like if someone's trying to change our mind, we take a defensive posture. Bob Inglis, the South Carolina congressman, who was a sort of has this great quote, and he says, "The heart decides and the head justifies." Right. And I think this is really true about a lot of shifts. in his case, sort of he didn't believe in climate change. It was sort of a reflexive position. His family pushed him to rethink it. He did some evidence, but it was mostly a connection with a man who had faith, who talked to him about climate change. And it was the combination of his family pushing him and this person who could speak his language, who could talk to him in a way that he understood, that changed his mind. And I think that's so true. So many political identity changers, especially the ones that I spoke to, we reflexively want to say, well, I looked at the evidence, right? It was clear. Suddenly I could see clearly. And oftentimes there is a lot more underneath that. There's a need for we're shamed by our group and we need new friends. There's emotion underneath that. But the common claim among political identity changers, whether it's from Reagan to Mussolini, is I didn't change, my party changed. And it's an interesting thing because every other identity change, pretty much, folks are like, hey, I changed. You have to believe that I changed. I'm a new person. Political identity changers, for the most part, say that they didn't change.
It wasn't them. Right. A reminder that you can reach us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353 or at listentothemiddle.com. And Tolliver, we should note that our current president, President Trump, has changed his political party in his lifetime. He used to be a Democrat, and previous presidents have changed their views on some pretty big issues.
Yeah, remember that President Obama who lit the White House in rainbow colors to celebrate the Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage was originally against it. Here he is in 2004 and then in 2012.
I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. But I also detest the sort of bashing and vilifying of gays and lesbians because I think it's unduly divisive.
At a certain point, I've just concluded that for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
I guess we can call that change you can believe in, Tolliver.
You're a monster.
Oh, boy. We'll be back with your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking how you have changed your mind about something big or made a big change in your life. Tolliver, again, the number, please.
Just call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on YouTube.
And I am joined this hour by author Benoit Denizet-Lewis, whose new book is called You've Changed: The Promise and Price of Self-Transformation, and Braver Angels National Ambassador John Wood Jr. And let's get to a phone call because the lines are lighting up. Tommy is calling in from Augusta, Georgia. Tommy, how have you changed in a big way?
Well, for me, I think that change is more than just a singular event, and I think that the mindset of change can be really important. I have a military background, and one thing that we always had to stress was whenever change is happening, you have to be ready for it, or you could lose on the battlefield. And those lessons can be translated directly over into the rest of the world too. If you're not prepared for the change, you're going to get left behind.
Can you think of an example where that was the case for you?
I don't know a specific one where maybe it was the case for me. I can go back to those days in, I served in Iraq and overseas and all, but I think nowadays you have this emergent market with the development of AI and so many things like that are happening. And if you're not going out and being proactive, you're going to get left behind. You're going to be in a job that's going to disappear, or you're not going to have the skills to compete. And then you're banking on a retirement from a company that no longer needs you. Those things are not, there's some cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah. Tommy, thank you for that. And thank you for your service. Benoit, we just think about such a fast changing world right now. He brings up AI, he brings up being on the battlefield, and you have to be ready for whatever's going to change. What about that?
Yeah, I just, thanks for that call. I have a student I teach this class on transformation and identity change. And one of my students just did a really cool mini documentary about how the military can change people. And I think, I asked my students, this question of students are feeling really very, very powerless. We think about, And the last 10 years has been such in flux that I think one of the ways that people are struggling, there's more anxiety, more depression, more loneliness. And one of the things I'm trying to talk to my students about, and everyone I encounter, is sort of how do we think we can affect change now? What's the way that we can change the world, and what's the right mix of, like, how much do I focus on changing myself versus how much do I focus on changing the world and institutions? And I think my students are struggling with that. They're struggling with what do they do with their devices. I mean, there's been an interesting moment here in the last 6 months where a lot of young people are saying, I'm absolutely addicted to my devices, and one of the ways that I need to change is I need to get rid of that. And so this is like a real fascinating trend that actually young people are kind of leading, and it's going to be interesting to see if it takes off. There's a lot of fear, obviously, about what AI is going to do. And also this idea that, like, our transformations now, our changes, we can, we have all these devices that tell us, like, how we're doing in the day. And there's a way in which we can entrust so much of our data to these things as opposed to sort of looking inward and just asking ourselves how we're doing.
I heard from a teacher recently who said that, the next generation after Generation Z, Generation Alpha, is rebelling against the phones. They don't like TikTok. They don't want to be on the phone. So good, they're coming. Let's go. Let's go to Joe, who's calling in from St. Louis, Missouri. Hi, Joe. What about you? How have you changed?
Good evening. From high school, I was a left libertarian, like very live and let live views on sexuality, drugs, multiculturalism, and all that. But in my mid-20s, I made part of my morning routine reading news websites, and chief among them was NPR. And they had the comment section still at that time, and there was this very dedicated group of little gadflies in there that would point out different perspectives or errors or point you to different places, things to read to give you a different perspective. And at first I was like, I'm going to prove these guys wrong. Because like all young people, you think you know everything. If people disagree, they're ignorant or immoral. So I'd look up what these commenters were saying, and I'd be like, oh, gosh darn it, sure enough, they're right, or they have a point here. And it was over the course of several years that, and these guys all had more traditionalist, conservative, even like reactionary perspectives, and they were making it their business to. And it took a while, and it took a lot of reading and losing a couple friends along the way. But I did come to realize that I wasn't always right, and that the single perspective that had been pushed, this kind of good versus evil right side of history narrative that I had gotten from sitcoms, from my school curricula, from the nightly news, wasn't so much about morality, but about, well, it had something to do with that, but money and power as well.
Yeah. Joe, thank you for that. And John, he talks about losing some friends along the way. It makes me wonder about the trade-off when you are going to decide, actually, I see things in this different way, but am I worried that my neighbors, that my family are not going to accept it if I make this change?
Well, if you don't mind me tying this point just back to Braver Angels very quickly. And
please.
So, Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots cross-partisan organization, focused on bridging the partisan divide, not just in institutions and in policy, but in local communities and at kitchen tables. We really started doing sort of basically the equivalent of marriage counseling for Republicans and Democrats who couldn't figure out how to get along in their own communities. But the name was originally Better Angels, which is a quote from Abraham Lincoln, the better angels of our nature, right? We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break the bonds of our affection. We had to change the name, and I won't get into the details, but there was a little bit of a trademark dispute, and we landed on the name Braver Angels. I actually landed on the name Braver Angels. And the way I explained that is to say that traditionally in the work of bridging the divide, there's a great focus on empathy, which is vital. But there's got to be some courage in that work, too, not just because when you engage someone who thinks different than you politically, he might not treat you well, but because even more so, people who do agree with you politically might see you as selling out the values of your side by daring to sort of engage with the humanity of somebody who they might consider to be a threat to those political interests and so forth. And so that's part of the reason why we lose friends in this process, and yet without that, there's no democracy to preserve, right? So
Yeah.
it's an unfortunate side effect of having an open mind and being open to engaging, but you do also make incredible relationships and friendships in that journey as well.
You know, we're hearing about the sort of the fear of change, but Benoit, I have to bring up the fact that it does seem that it is such a part of the American identity. When you think about the people that have, you know, born again Christians, when you think about, and you talk about this in your book, prisoners who the whole idea is rehabilitation, and a lot of them convert to religion when they're in prison so that they can come out a different person that's not a danger to society. It's just such a part of our identity as Americans to embrace change.
It is absolutely a part of identity. One quick point, just to what John said. You know, for a chapter about people who change their political identities, I went door to door with deep canvassers, and that is incredibly hopeful work, right? This idea that we're going to go and talk to people who have different political beliefs and find connection, and that was actually quite inspiring. You know, so we have this knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, no one's going to talk to someone, and we would go to the front door, and I was there with a progressive guy, and if it was a conservative, she would say, you know, there's no way I'm going to talk to you, and then 30 minutes later, she was saying, oh, do you guys have to leave so soon? There was a way that there was a real connection formed, which was beautiful. Yes, we have America is synonymous with reinvention, with starting again, and in the narratives that we choose to believe. I'm really interested in sort of how do we construct a change narrative that is believable to other people. So prisoners who are seeking parole, many murderers who are seeking parole in California, I write about the process of them having to essentially convince strangers that they are transformed, that they're new people. I mean, their literal freedom depends on it. But in many ways, we all have to do that with the parole board of the internet. So there's a way in which we're all sort of, you know, having to like act out our transformation and have it be believed by other people. And you know, which ones we choose to believe and which ones we don't is really fascinating.
Yeah, social media definitely plays a big role here. Tolliver, what's coming in at listentothemiddle.com? Speaking of.
Yeah, Kevin says, I used to have a center-right view, but what changed was the way Republicans treated President Obama while he was in office. Roberta in Washington says, my son-in-law, a lifelong Republican, changed his party affiliation after January 6th. Then Paul in Lansing says, my then 12-year-old decided to kneel for racial injustice at their school, and we received notice of detention, then expulsion if they continued. This changed my entire way of thinking. Grateful for the kids that show us the way.
Again, you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com or 8444-MIDDLE. Let's go to Bailey, who's calling in from San Antonio, Texas. Bailey, what about you?
Hi there. Yeah, so this is a great question, one I've been thinking about recently. I grew up in super rural central Missouri, very conservative, very Christian inherently, right? And those two things are kind of fused together. You know, you're a Christian because you're a conservative, and you're conservative because you're a Christian. And so it's really hard to see outside of that and to get out of that vicious cycle. And I moved down to a major metropolis, well, down here to, you know, San Antonio. I'd say major, but large city, right? Exposed to more culture, more religion, more points of view. And you start realizing, like, okay, I don't have it all figured out. and it sounds like such a small example, but I'll give you an example. Public transportation, right? Let's just think of something. We don't need that back home in small town Missouri. And so you don't think it's an issue. You don't know why people are, you know, making an issue about it. Then you go somewhere and you actually need it and you use it. And you're like, whoa. And so that's like a super silly example, but you take that, and it's a bigger scale. It's about like exposing yourself to people who just believe different things, and you realize you don't have it all figured out. And it kind of leads to this more empathetic worldview towards humanity. Does that make sense?
It does, but let me ask you this, Bailey. When you go back home to rural Missouri, do you change back into your former self, or are you your new San Antonio major metropolitan area guy?
You would have to ask my family, I guess. I don't know. I would think I stay true to myself.
Okay,
but
good.
You know, But it really, when you go back and visit, you start realizing, like, okay, this is why I believe that. And there's people that I knew and went to high school with, they've never left the state of Missouri, and they think they have it figured out,
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes from, literally expanding your horizons, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of that.
Great. Thank you, Bailey, for that call. John, it's something that, so many people, as they get older and they move around, they do expand their horizons, and they probably do change into slightly different people, or really different people.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's possible that in my own case, my sort of capacity for that kind of change was a reflection of just sort of like just circumstantially having to live life that way growing up. So, once upon a time I was a nominee for Congress. Feels like another lifetime ago, and I remember whether I was speaking to a liberal black church in South Central LA or a Tea Party club and white Tea Party club in LA County, people would say, "How is it that you are qualified at the age of 26 to represent a district as complex and diverse as ours?" And I'd say, well, interesting family background. My mother's a liberal black Democrat from inner city LA. My father's a conservative white Republican from Tennessee. I grew up explaining my mother to my father to my mother, and that's why I can represent all of you, right? And so it was usually good for a laugh, but I was a kid who grew up sort of not traveling geographically, but socioeconomically. I was around the world and back on a regular basis. So, I was hanging out with my mother's family in the hood and knowing not to step onto certain streets with the wrong color shoelaces. I'd visit my father's folks in La Jolla, California. They lived in a big house off the water down the street from Mitt Romney's house, the one with the car elevator.
The garage,
they used
right,
to talk
yes,
about
right.
exactly.
The elevator.
In 2012. But then day to day, I lived in multicultural, middle-class Culver City, California, fourth most diverse school district in America. And so there's something to be said about the idea that when you're exposed to more and more people, more and more cultures, more and more ways of thinking, you have the experience of learning more about yourself, but you may hold to sort of, doctrines and dogmas a little bit more loosely because you just have so many different perspectives for seeing the world.
Let's go to another call. Adam is calling in from Denver, Colorado. Adam, what about you? How have you changed?
Hey, thank you guys for having me. The way I changed that I thought about just listening was in high school and college. I was very kind of loose and sex positive. I'd say just in college there was that culture on the campus of kind of open sexuality and kind of hookup culture, and I really thought that was normal and good for me. And it wasn't until towards the end of college that I, started understanding how in my own body and like my life and my spirit, I was like hurting myself. And so it took me some time to kind of change out of that, which was for me the norm, kind of meeting girls, going on dates, trying to, see where things could go. And so once I realized it was hurting myself, that's when I kind of took a step back and, really saw that it was not just myself, but maybe, other people that I was, could be hurting emotionally and stuff. And I kind of didn't realize it. And so once I did, I tried to start, making a change, and it took a lot of time and effort, because it was so, normal and attractive to me. And being able to make amends to other people has been difficult, but also very healing for me. And, so that's what came up for me, just like having it be so normalized, and then realizing, well, maybe this shouldn't be normal for me, at least.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, Adam, and because Benoit, you've thought a lot about that yourself too.
You mean in my own life and sort of, no, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of that. I mean, I think what's interesting throughout all of these changes and is this question of, especially when we sort of shift in some meaningful way, or our perspective shifts, and oftentimes that comes with an identity shift of some kind, is like what stays the same and what shifts, right? We think about people who have these dramatic shifts. I write about Michael Glatz in the book, who was used to be a progressive, gay, very anti-religion, and turned into he claimed to be heterosexual, turned very conservative, Christian fundamentalist, right? And what is happening in that kind of shift? And what's so interesting about that is that and for people who undergo psychedelic experiences, what often stays the same is the the core personality doesn't shift as much as we think it does. So for someone like Michael, or for people that do these shifts, it's like, was a black and white thinker, is still a black and white thinker, but has taken on this new identity. So this question of what stays the same and what shifts is really fascinating.
Well, Tolliver, we mentioned President Obama shifting on views earlier in the show, but Vice President J.D. Vance famously likened President Trump to Hitler before he became his running mate.
I don't know if you're going to go there. Yeah, absolutely. And listen to these comments he made on Charlie Rose in 2016 and then on Fox News in 2024.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him, and I've noticed this willingness from people who think a lot like I do that, look, we told you so. To all these white working class voters, we told you so. We told you that Trump was going to be a terrible candidate.
Look, I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president, and it's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard to make sure he gets a second term. I think you should. When you're wrong about something, you should change your mind and be honest with people about that fact.
Worth noting also, Tolliver, that J.D. Vance has actually changed his name twice in his life. J.D. Vance is his third name.
Which begs the question, what were the first two?
They were
Terrence,
similar.
Bartholomew.
Deuteronomy. We'll be right back with more of your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour we're talking about change, and we're asking you how you've made a big change in your life or how you've changed your mind about something that really matters. I'm joined by John Wood Jr., National Ambassador for Braver Angels, and author Benoit Denizet-Lewis, whose new book is called You've Changed. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or at listentothemiddle.com. And just before we get back to the phones, John, when you hear those clips of J.D. Vance and Barack Obama changing their minds over the years, what do you think about that? Is that a lack of conviction, or is that just a rational evolution of views?
Well, see, those are complicated examples because they are high-profile politicians. And it's not to say that high-profile politicians don't change their mind due to pure convictions, but there's so many different factors, pushing a politician to adopt one position or the other. I do think that as a state legislator, Barack Obama was actually for gay marriage before he was against it and before he was for it again. And J.D. Vance was looking to make a career and a higher level in politics. So I do believe that these men did have a mind change, but it's in a different sort of context than other folks are typically subject to. But it does just go to the reality that life is complicated, right? And there are ways in which we change as a consequence of being exposed to new things. There are ways in which we might be pushed to change because we have experiences that shock us so much that we adopt a different point of view. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have incentives to change, and we may tell ourselves that, I'm in a principled way, now choosing Coke over Pepsi, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that they just offered me a great job,
Right.
So, all of these things are in the mix.
All right, let's go to another call. Callan is calling in from Minnesota. Callan, how have you changed?
Hi. I feel like I'm the first younger lady you've had on the show tonight, so that's kind of cool.
Welcome. Yeah, a big change for us. So go ahead.
Congratulations. I guess I wanted to point out first that most changes are not a one-time event. I like to think of change as like a tier system. And as another caller said, a lot of the times it comes with like an expanded horizon. And for me, I think a lot of people in America specifically have that going through high school because you're in a peer group, and that's kind of brutal. And then you get out into the real world and you realize who you're actually allowed to be with your own thoughts. And for me, I think that the changing world doesn't represent young women very well, especially in the political spectrum. There's been a lot of whiplash. I grew up in a very conservative family where a lot of the women stayed home. And being what I would consider a liberalist in high school, I really chafed against that. And then I got out into the working world and had to decide if I wanted to balance being what I would consider a fully dedicated mother or a career woman. And that clashed a lot. And I think the difference is that young women can't always have it all because you never get the credit for doing both. And so you have to pick one. But then you've still lost because society is telling you that you can do both when that isn't the reality for a lot of people.
So you feel like
know?
you haven't had the choice to make the changes that you may have wanted?
Yeah, and I think for me, I found them, but I got a lot of backlash because I figured out who I was in my early 20s, and then I recently got married last year, and I'm leaving my career because I want to serve my husband, and I want to be a stay-at-home mother. So I feel like I went full circle, because in high school I was like, this is where I do not want to be.
That was not what you were interested in. Callan, thank you very much for that. Benoit, what do you think about that?
Well, one thing that struck me with what Callum just said, the beginning, which I think is really interesting, is that change is not this sort of one-time thing. And people often, we see that, or I saw that in my reporting and talking to people who had sort of experiences with psychedelics, which are becoming more and more popular, or other kind of epiphanies or powerful experiences. And those experiences can feel like everything has shifted permanently. And it sometimes it does shift the way that we look at the world, but then oftentimes these things happen we're at a workshop, or we're in the forest, or we're in a special place where this happens, and then we have to return to the real world, and we're encountered where all of our old triggers come back. So this question of like, how do we maintain change when we have it can be a spiritual experience or some other powerful experience? How do we maintain that and keep that feeling? So many people I talked to said, I thought I was changed forever. I thought that I had fundamentally shifted, and then life happened again, and I went back to this sort of old way of thinking. And that was a real theme for people about how do I create the conditions in my life for this change? Who do I surround myself with to sort of stay on this path?
They want that.
John,
change
I have a
to
quick
be
question,
permanent.
because it's kind of related to our last caller. But she said things changed as she got older. 20 years ago, I remember hearing like, "Oh, you're a leftist. As you get older, you're gonna become conservative." It happens to everyone. Is that a trend you still see, or was that made up? Who knows?
Well, I don't think that that's ever happened to everyone. It's probably always been slightly exaggerated, but there is general sort of truth to it, and I think it's just sort of the idea is that as a function of aging, you tend to find yourself, perhaps, I don't want to say stuck in your ways, but sort of valuing your ways, you might say. And thinking more in terms of cultivating the things that have worked instead of always striving towards how you can change something to be better, right? And, and we've had callers who have sort of pointed to this. In youth, you're very quick to adopt the thing that feels good, right? And with age, it may not be the case, or it may be the case, that you've discovered that some of those things you were quick to embrace out of passion, you're now paying a price for and looking back on with a greater sense of prudence. So we had a gentleman talking about, he was a playboy when he was younger, and he had a very sort of like, free love philosophy, which you might think of as sort of a, progressive or liberal kind of thing. And now he's much more conservative because he had experiences that made him sort of second guess, whether or not that was wise for him, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a part of the that's a part of the pattern.
Well,
but nothing is absolute.
I think that just makes me think of our recent political history, which is we had Obama come in as the change candidate, and then Trump came in and won in 2016, and then in 2020 the Democrats decided not to go with somebody who's going to bring drastic change, but the one with all the experience. Biden was the one who won that very crowded primary back in 2020. Let's get to another caller, Lisa, who's calling in from Denver, Colorado. Lisa, go ahead with your thoughts.
Hello. Hi. Yeah. Well, just to kind of jump on the last thing, part of my story and the change I went through was walking into my faith of Christianity, and I got baptized 3 weeks ago. And I'm still a liberal Democrat. In fact, I feel even more valued with the Democratic Party. But I had a hip replacement last year. Was really sick, a lot of pain, alcoholic addict, and got sober, started walking my faith, started my own business, And part of my faith in doing the 12 steps really changed how I view the world and people, and extending more grace and mercy on people that are not politically aligned with me, actually hearing their concerns and how they feel about things, and not that they might be, for example, an anti-vaxxer or that something about Trump. I'm hearing a sadness about a story they're sharing or whatnot. And so it's really changed how I hear people.
Yeah, Lisa, great points all. Benoit, I'm so glad we got somebody who talks about addiction and going through the 12-step program.
That's so great to hear. And I mean, the 12 steps they don't work for everybody. It's important to say that, but they are designed to transform people. And if you spend enough time in recovery meetings, in the 12 steps, you see transformations that are truly astonishing and stunning. And I don't think that we should downplay that. I mean, people who go, and they experience what your caller just said, this kind of ability to sort of listen to people in different ways and to connect with people who they would not normally have connected with. There's this sort of equalizing factor that happens in recovery meetings and in 12-step meetings that is really powerful and beautiful to see. So both in my experience in the 12 steps and then talking with other folks who have been in them, this is all about change. It is all about changing the way that you're living. And it's a remarkable program. It doesn't work for everybody, but it is a remarkable change generator.
Yeah. Bob is calling in from Raleigh, North Carolina. Bob, what about you? How have you changed?
Hi there. Nice to hear from you. Well, the death penalty. I'm 76, and about a half my lifetime ago, I thought it was okay because some people richly deserved it. But as time went on, I learned that, for one, it's unfair. It's not applied evenly across strata of society, or races for that matter. For two, it's too expensive. It's actually been found to be cheaper to incarcerate somebody for life than to go through all the appeals process. For three, mistakes can be made and are made, and it's irrevocable when it happens. For a four, it's unfair, and it coarsens our society to feel that we can kill each other for one reason or another. So after finding all that out about it, I changed my mind and said, no, this is a bad idea.
Well, and Bob, did you face any backlash from your community, from your family, from your neighbors, from your friends when you made that change?
No, I don't think so, because I'm basically a fairly liberal guy. So when I changed my views and when it came up in conversation, I would tell them what I told you, and they'd go, that's not really unreasonable at all.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do this anymore. There's too many things wrong with it. And just one more thing, is it's become so poorly administered, and mistakes and suffering happen because of the way it's been done lately.
Yeah. Bob, thank you very much for that call. John, do you hear a lot of people in your work with Braver Angels? Have you met people who on a specific issue have said, you know what, I used to think this and now I think this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people have all sorts of experiences that lead them from one point of view to the other. I mean, sometimes, you have people who, you have a woman who, might have grown up in a conservative Christian rural background, never exposed to people of color, and sort of has, a very conservative view of criminal justice reform, and then she becomes a teacher. She goes into inner cities. She sees how the cops deal with, young black and brown kids or whatnot, and a couple of things happen, and suddenly she's got a brand new point of view on a certain aspect of social reality, And you have analogous things that go the other way too. You have people who grow up very sort of anti-organized religion and so forth. They have a very kind of liberated kind of mindset and perspective, and then something might take them out into the Midwest. They wind up sort of, visiting with an extended relative or a family that lives a way of life that seems wholesome and regenerating to them, and they wind up looking at the world a different way as a consequence of that. There's a certain elasticity, I think, to human psychology that allows for minds to change. But one interesting thing, and I wonder if Brother Benoit is sort of, reflects on this in his book at all, I think is the difference between values and opinions. I think it's possible for a person to and I think, Benoit, you kind of alluded to this earlier a bit, but I think it's possible for a person to change their opinions in a way that keeps a consistency with an underlying value, right? And so if part of your underlying value is being a person who is compassionate, well, you might have first expressed compassion through a belief in sort of like get the government out of everything so the churches can take care of people, and then come to believe, oh, wait, the government has a role in feeding the hungry, or vice versa, and that might amount to a political change or an opinion change. But it can still often proceed from the same underlying sort of moral foundation. So that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think one other thing to sort of piggyback on that is that we oftentimes have these, one of the interesting things that I noticed when deep canvassing is the canvasser would talk to folks and try to see if they knew anyone in, like if they were trying to change people's minds on transgender issues. Do you know a gay person? Do you know a transgender person? And oftentimes, knowing someone or feeling like you know someone can change your mind on this big group that you don't really know and you think you have some idea about, and then you meet an actual person who's a member of that community and your belief shifts in some fundamental way. So, and I'll say one last thing, because I found deep canvassing so fascinating. The goal was to change the mind of the person answering the door, right? But the experience of the deep canvassers often is they were changed too. They had maybe a sense of like, oh, what is this person who thinks differently than me, how they're going to react. And they became much more hopeful about creating sort of connection with people who disagreed with them.
Let me just sneak in one more call here. Sharon is in Moncks Corner, South Carolina. Sharon, briefly, go ahead. How have you changed?
Well, when I was younger, in my teens, I got on drugs and drinking real bad, and I stayed on it for 30 years. I lost the respect of my children and my family. The only ones that stood by me was my brother and my mom. It was very important to me that I had my sister in my life, but she decided not to be in my life for 30 years. Just recently, I would say in the last 10 years, I got off of the drugs, off the drinking. And 6 years ago, my sister came back into my life. And when she came back into my life, she showed me how much she loved me by helping me when I needed help. I'm homeless right now, and she's helped me every way that she can. My sister's and my love has grown for leaps and bounds. She told me she's proud of me. And, you know, it really changed me because I've never heard that before. And now I'm proud of me, because I am off of the drugs and off of the drinking, and I've become the kind of person that is responsible because of her. She has helped me be the person that I can be.
Sharon, good for you. Thank you so much for that call. A really great story of change to end this hour. Benoit, I'll come back to you. Just so many personal stories. And I will tell you, the phone lines were lit up the entire program. A lot of people had a lot of things to talk about when it comes to how they have changed, despite the fear that sometimes comes along with it.
Yeah, and that last caller was really special. And one of the things that she said that I just think is worth remembering is that we do need other people to believe in us. We do need that, right? We often think of change as like, oh, I'm going to do this for myself. Well, no, we change in relationship, and we change because people believe in that we can. And I think that's so important to remember, that we change often in community, and someone believing that we can change often is the catalyst for our own sort of journey of transformation. So I think that was so special.
All right, well, I want to thank my guest, Benoit Denizet-Lewis. His new book is called You've Changed, The Promise and Price of Self-Transformation, and John Wood Jr., National Ambassador for Braver Angels. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you both.
Thanks, this was fun. Thank you.
And we'll have more of your thoughts on change on our podcast feed. Just subscribe to The Middle to watch or listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we're going to be live from Nevada Public Radio in Las Vegas, asking if you have confidence in the integrity of the midterm elections that are coming up.
And a quick reminder, we're taking the show on the road to Kenosha, Wisconsin on May 12th. For tickets to be in the audience and participate, just go to listentothemiddle.com.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Johnny Leonidas, and Marina Price. Our technical director is Steve Mork. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.